Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. It is Monday morning and I'm joined by Niall Stanage. Nice to see you, Niall. I hear you had a long journey over the weekend.
I had an arduous journey doing my fatherly duties. I was moving stuff for my daughter from Charlotte to New York City. So it was a 10-hour drive in a moving truck. What more fun could you have on a weekend?
Good man, good man.
How was your weekend?
It was just fine, yeah. Happy summer weekend, enjoying some nice weather. It was intensely hot yesterday, but yeah, good weekend.
Well, we should get down to business, I suppose, Robbie. So what is on your radar?
I suppose we shall. Well, the historic peace summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin took place this weekend in Alaska, with the two nations coming somewhat closer to achieving a lasting peace in Ukraine. Now, those who had hoped this meeting would result in an immediate end to the conflict were left disappointed. However, top U.S. diplomat and negotiator Steve Witkoff said that Putin had agreed the Ukraine would receive a NATO-esque protection guarantee, which would protect Ukraine from further Russian aggression after the war. Now, that's a key component, obviously, of any peace agreement. Ukraine can't simply agree to lose some territory now if it remains the case that Russia will resume the attack later or at some future date. But on the Ukrainian front, it's unfortunately the case that President Zelensky will likely have to agree to territorial concessions in order to bring this conflict to an end. There's a dawning realization among even the most staunchly pro-Ukraine commentators that the war simply will not end unless Ukraine agrees to let Russia keep the conquered territories. The alternative is a drawn-out conflict that kills thousands more Ukrainians and results in the entire country coming under Russian control. The skillful diplomacy of Trump, of Witkoff, and of Secretary of State Marco Rubio is designed to avoid that outcome. Indeed, Rubio's done a terrific job this weekend of schooling the reflexively hawkish voices in the mainstream media who think any public display of respect toward Putin is somehow emboldening him in the Russian takeover of Ukraine. Media pundit after media pundit complained endlessly about Putin receiving the red carpet treatment, riding in a fancy car with Trump, being treated with decency as befits his station as an important world leader. In fact, popular liberal ex-personality Brian Krasenstein called on the U.S. government to assassinate Putin as soon as he set foot in Alaska, which is obviously an insane idea. I don't think I have to point that out. By comparison, the mainstream media was a bit more restrained than that. They were still quite furious that Trump was being nice to Putin. Look, being mean to Putin was going to work, then Joe Biden would have already succeeded at ending the war. He didn't because diplomacy is a bit more complicated and subtle than just screaming Putin bad at the top of your lungs over and over again. Rubio made this point expertly during his conversation with ABC's Martha Raddatz. Let's watch.
Critics of President Trump will say the pomp and circumstance, the red carpet, the warm handshake, that President Trump simply lost that Putin gained there just by being on the world stage and walking down a red carpet with the president. Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, critics of President Trump are always going to find something to criticize. You don't even pay attention to it anymore. But I will tell you this. Putin is already on the world stage. He's already on the world stage. The guy's conducting a full-scale war in Ukraine.
And then here's a bit more from that clip.
He's already on the world stage. When I hear people say that, oh, it elevates him. Well, all we do is talk about Putin all the time. All the media's done is talk about Putin all the time for the last 4 or 5 years. That doesn't mean he's right about the war. That doesn't mean he's justified about the war. Put all that aside. It means you're not going to have a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. You're not going to end a war between Russia and Ukraine without dealing with Putin.
Rubio has it exactly right. We can't end this war by refusing to give Putin attention or the spotlight or whatever it was Raddatz was complaining about there. Frankly, the argument she's making sounded to me like she was calling for, deplatforming Putin, like she's saying he should be kicked off Twitter or something. We shouldn't be surprised to hear a mainstream media personality, of course, returning to this very familiar well. Liberal and progressive media personalities love the idea of deplatforming people because they have an almost religious faith in censorship and silencing. These are the preferred tactics of the mainstream media folks who imagine that if they can't hear or see people and opinions they don't like, must mean those sinister forces have been defeated or swept aside. You'd think they might have learned by now that this tactic usually backfires, and in any case, Putin is not an account that can be suspended or an idea that can be banned or a phenomenon that can be ignored. Or a military power that can be defeated. He's a political figure who must be engaged with. And lest anyone think the meeting was nothing but pleasantries, President Trump gave Putin a letter from the First Lady, Melania Trump, asking him to end the war for the sake of the children who are suffering because of it. Mr. Putin, she wrote, you can single-handedly restore their melodic laughter. Now let us all hope and pray that this meeting is followed by further diplomacy that ends this horrific conflict. And we'll be talking later in the show about the Zelensky component of all this. But there were a number of media interviews Marco Rubio did over the weekend where he faced basically a version of that question. Aren't we like normalizing Putin or something by shaking his hand? I mean, what good would it do to invite him here and be insulting to him? How would that help end the war? So I was very perplexed by that, because this was a media obsession over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I've a bit of a different view, as I think I do, of the conflict writ large. I mean, I take some of the points you made, and the Brian Krasenstein idea is absolutely nuts. That
World War III on
just have snipers on the rooftops and take him out as soon as he walks off the plane. I mean, that's like a ludicrous idea. Yeah. I think that the situation in Ukraine is genuinely complicated and difficult, because I think perhaps a little bit more than you take the argument that you can't just embolden Putin or have no deterrent to him doing this kind of thing in the future, whether it's in Ukraine or elsewhere in Eastern Europe. To my mind, the Alaska summit was one where Putin accomplished more of his aims or got more of his desires than the United States did, because there was no immediate ceasefire, and whatever about smiling or red carpets or whatever, it did, I think, reduce the isolation of Russia. I don't think it's necessarily about platforming or deplatforming. It's about having this meeting where he is welcomed on equal footing, as if we're just having a kind of casual discussion, rather than a man who has invaded a neighbouring sovereign nation and thus instigated a war that has now lasted more than 3 years.
Yeah, I just don't know that the isolation, though, if I thought isolation was going to bring the war to a close, then I would support, playing hardball to a greater degree. And Trump has countenanced playing hardball to some degree. He's been frustrated with Putin. He's threatened sanctions, but of course previous sanctions have done nothing. A greater form of isolation has not deterred Putin from continuing this conflict. So then I think we have to consider the possibility, and I was very happy to hear Witkoff say that apparently some kind of security guarantee, not NATO, but a security guarantee for the rest of Ukraine is on the table. I mean, that's the best deal they're going to get. Is it not? I can't imagine a more favorable situation for Ukraine than what is still under Ukrainian hands remains Ukraine, and there is an understanding that Russia could not invade again because it is now under the protection of, it's not actually NATO, but under the protection of Europe or us. I don't see that is a good deal, because they're not at risk of further invasion. I can't imagine anything better than that coming about from this.
If it is a deal, if those security guarantees are ironclad and dependable,
right,
the question is really to what extent or with what specificity will those security guarantees be offered? Because as you just alluded to, obviously the nightmare scenario for Ukraine is they make a deal, they concede some kind of territory, and then Russia just comes back in a year, 18 months or 2 years, and storms back in again. So that's why it's very important to have these guarantees. Let's see how the meeting today goes, because I think there's going to be a lot of concern and scrutiny as to whether the pendulum swings back to a fairer group.
And I hope those security guarantees really bring Europe into the picture for being responsible for Ukraine's defense or protection, not getting the U.S. more involved in this region. I don't really think that's something the American people want very much. Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. How are you doing this morning, Lindsay?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? I haven't seen you since the weekend, so how was your weekend?
Yeah, I was just fine. How was yours?
It was good. I got to see my baby. She'll be coming to D.C. soon now that I'm officially your co-host.
Good.
You can't get rid of me.
Have you found a place to live in the city? Choosing a D.C. neighborhood is a really big choice.
Well, I'm trying to navigate through the streets, but there's a lot of federal officers all over the place, so it's a little hard to try to
Keeping
figure out.
you safe, Lindsay. I know how much you appreciate that.
No, I do appreciate it. I think I never like to go back and forth with people that actually had the experience of somewhere or living somewhere. I think part of what my move here has taught me is that, there could be studies and polls and all that stuff, but people living here actually have a good say in how it feels. So I'm excited to be a resident and see how I feel, but I hope that we can, Meet in the middle with the temperature. So coming up on Rising, we're talking about a lot of stuff, right? So I'll be discussing House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. He promises to bring Kristi Noem before Congress.
Also, MSNBC is changing their name. Reactions haven't been the most positive.
And if you, like me, want more Epstein files released, there's some good news on that front. But first, Robby, what is on your radar today?
Let's find out, shall we? Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg just can't catch a break. Now, Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor and a major leftist voice on social media, is yelling at him about his wealth. Reich writes on X, Mark Zuckerberg has spent $110 million to buy 11 houses in Palo Alto's neighborhood. He's turning the homes into a compound that's on top of his 30-bedroom, 30-bathroom compound in Hawaii and another in Lake Tahoe. I don't want to hear that billionaires can't afford a wealth tax. Here's my question. Is this the left distilled down to its purest essence? An essence that is simply jealous and envious toward a successful business person? Does a desire to confiscate through progressive taxation the wealth of someone who earned his money by actually building something? To take from the successful because what? Because they were too successful? I wonder what's left once a country stigmatizes productivity and encourages its most entrepreneurial people to just take their businesses elsewhere. This is, of course, exactly the experiment New York City is about to conduct, assuming they select Zohran Mamdani, a self-described socialist, to be their next mayor. Here was House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries attempting to grapple with this reality, the reality that Zohran, a socialist, is probably a more likely future Democratic Party leader than the squishy centrism that the rest of the party is offering.
And how do you think about the message of socialism, or being a socialist, and what that may portend for the Democratic Party?
Well, I think, as I indicated, listen, my view about what we as Democrats stand for, what we're fighting for, we need to lower the high cost of living in the United States of America. We need to fix our broken healthcare system, and we need to clean up corruption in Washington, D.C., so we actually have a government that works for the American people, for everyday Americans, for hardworking American taxpayers, as opposed to working for the privileged few.
But back to Zuckerberg for a moment, because I think his trajectory is an important indictment of where the Democratic Party is heading. Now, for years, Zuck was a favorite punching bag of both the left and the right. Over the course of the 2010s, he became an important funder of liberal causes, which earned him the perpetual ire of Republicans, even as Facebook itself remained a vital source of web traffic for right-of-center news sites. Then, in 2016, Donald Trump got elected president, and progressives eventually landed on "it's Facebook's fault" as their preferred explanation for how this could have happened. It became commonplace to see mainstream headlines explicitly blaming Zuckerberg for allowing his social media site to platform and advertise Republican messaging. Now, 8 years prior, when Barack Obama successfully used Facebook to reach voters, including by hiring Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes to do digital outreach for the campaign, no one in the media had any problem with this. After it became apparent that non-Democrats could use Facebook too, Hughes suddenly started advocating a breakup of the company. When Democrats seized upon the now thoroughly debunked notion that Russian ads and bots on Facebook had swung the election to Trump, the anti-Facebook fever pitch reached its apex. Meanwhile, Zuckerberg had not exactly endeared himself to Republicans. Developments in 2020 and 2021 further enraged the right as the Hunter Biden laptop story, COVID-19 pandemic, produced moderation decisions that conservatives correctly despised. This was the moment of greatest danger for Zuckerberg. Principled libertarian defenders of free markets like myself, we were in retreat. Rising populism on both the left and the right had threatened to make antitrust a reality for Facebook. But then a few things happened that ultimately benefited Zuckerberg. Most importantly, Facebook and other social media sites were able to demonstrate to conservatives that their egregiously bad moderation decisions were the result of federal interference, something libertarians had long opposed. Also, Zuckerberg learned how to punch back at Democrats and MAGA's intrinsic dislike of him. It softened. Under the second Trump administration, Zuckerberg enjoys an occasionally fraught but really much improved relationship with the president, which is broadly characteristic of other tech leaders. Elon Musk has a combative relationship with Trump, even though he loves the man. But the media still hates Zuck. For evidence, look no further than last week's story in the New York Times. Zuckerberg's compound had something that violated city code. A private school, writes the Times. The tone of the article matches the tone of the headline, pearl-clutching moral indignation. A private school in violation of the city code. The horror! Oh, the situation is perfectly understandable, though. After the pandemic hit, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerberg decided to enroll 2 of their daughters in a pod-based homeschool-type hybrid thing alongside a dozen other kids. Zuckerbergs are obscenely rich and own a massive compound, as I said, in Palo Alto, California. They hired staff, including teachers, an overseer, made the whole thing free for the families of the other kids. After the pandemic came to an end, they decided they'd prefer to continue educating their children in this manner. The other families obviously seem to like the deal too, and it seems like this is obvious, but if this arrangement, a wealthy man setting up a school on his own property, paying teachers' salaries, making the whole thing free for a dozen other families, if that violates some city code, well then the city code ought to be changed. Zuckerberg should have the right to use his own money to educate his children in a manner he sees fit. Unfortunately, that's contrary to the political direction the Democratic Party is taking. Under Mamdani, AOC, and others, the Democratic Party is going to be a hardcore, redistributionist, wealth-stigmatizing, capitalism-hating, anti-prosperity, anti-freedom, anti-choice party that thinks the government and the central planners get to decide who deserves how much of their own money and what you can do with your own property. It's coming to a city near you, if you're a New Yorker, very, very near you.
How much time do I have? Can I get the violin? I can't believe, I cannot believe that, it's not Zuckerberg's fault that the system is set up in a way that rewards millionaires and that punishes the everyday American. I think what people are asking for is fair treatment. So let's just comb through Zuckerberg, because you brought him up as an example as like the victim here. From 2013 to 2018, when he made a huge portion of his capital, he paid a tax rate, an effective tax rate of 13.7%. The average middle class person paid what?
I have no idea.
Way more, 21%. Okay, so that's the part of America that people are confused about. If I am an average middle class earning American and paying 21% on my income, why is Zuckerberg a billionaire and has been for quite some time paying 13% and much less than me? And so I think that is the biggest issue. The same thing with the Palo Alto school. It's like it's against code, but you don't have to follow those rules. But mind you,
have to follow that
I
rule,
have to.
and no one should have
but
to pay taxes.
it exists, and so either way, the
I
taxes
advocate
still
bringing
exist.
your tax rate down to. Now, Mark Zuckerberg has paid
Mark Zuckerberg knows how to skirt around.
You.
He knows how to skirt around things. That's the whole point. Rich people have access to things that poorer people do not, or middle class people do not, right? Like offshore bank accounts and ways. So it's just like people can get upset at the same time and be excited about him achieving the American dream. It's just that when somebody pulls their own money from resources in the same community that they're violating code in,
it's their money, not the community.
But it's just the principle that he has no. While he's benefited much from like skirting around major things, he also is only benefiting himself, but also raised the taxes in the community for everyone that's paying much more at a higher percentage of their income than he is. So in Palo Alto, because things like Facebook came by, the average garbage man can't afford to live in the community they might have grown up in. And so these are things that he should give back and pay forward. So that is an option because it's his personal wealth, but I still think that people can be upset that he's not paying the same tax rate as them and criticize him. And that's what most Democrats are doing.
Well, he's paying more.
Like actual dollar amount, but the amount and percentage.
I don't think I think the tax rate. I'd have to look closely at why that is, or if that is the case. But the tax rate should be the same for everyone, and it should be very low. It should be even lower than 10% is as much as I'm willing to go at it. I pay
flat for everyone.
I don't know why I paid a tax rate. I can tell you much appallingly higher than that last year. You probably did as well.
And it doesn't bother you.
We're not as wealthy as Zuckerberg. Of course, it bothers me. I want it zero.
Okay, so the average American can be bothered if Zuckerberg found a way to get his to 13% and you're paying 40%.
I just want access to, I want legal advice like that then. I don't want to bilk him more for being successful, but that's why I don't vote for Democrats. Hola, amigos. Buenos dias. And welcome to Rising Spanish Edition, I guess. I don't know why I did that. But,
I liked it.
Popped into my mind.
I'll take it. So how you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. It's kind of a gray day in the nation's capital, which, because of our studio setup, you all can't see it. There's windows behind us. When it's like overcast outside, it's much darker in here.
I like sunshine and rainbows. You know that's my personality. So I'm sure you're basking in this.
Person.
I'm sure you're basking in this overcast. Or do you not like overcast?
I enjoy the darkness.
Here we go. Okay, so coming up on Rising, I'm going to be talking about Vice President J.D. Vance and the several vacations he's taken so far.
Several?
Yes.
We will also be discussing Tulsi Gabbard pulling dozens of security clearances from Intel officials.
And former chair of Paramount Global, Sherry Redstone, is speaking out on why she decided to sell the company and Trump's lawsuit against CBS News. But first, of course, we have Robby's radar. So what is on your radar today?
Well, here's something you don't see every day. President Donald Trump's foreign policy is getting high marks from an unusual grader, Hillary Clinton. Indeed, the former First Lady, Secretary of State, and Democratic presidential candidate is typically no fan of the Donald. She's called him an illegitimate president, a threat to our democracy, a Russian stooge, and every other smear in the book. But even Clinton admits Trump is doing a pretty good job strengthening the U.S. relationship with European allies while getting more out of them in terms of NATO defense and also their financial contributions. Watch Clinton speaking with liberal Fox News commentator Jessica Tarlov.
I actually was encouraged by the events of the last several months. First of all, the NATO commitment by individual member states to increase their defense spending is very welcome. It's something that prior administrations have certainly sought, and I think it's great that we are seeing these commitments that now have to be followed through on.
Hillary went on to mention that she thinks there's a noticeable difference between now and between Trump's first term as president.
There is beginning to be a better understanding, both by the president and the people around him, as well as by the leaders of our European allies, that there can be common ground amongst us. And the kind of dismissiveness that we saw in the first Trump administration has been replaced by a much more obvious working relationship to the good of European security, transatlantic security, and hopefully Ukrainian security.
Well, now, that is high praise from a Democratic political figure who previously accused Trump of being totally beholden to Vladimir Putin and Russia and of working to subvert the NATO alliance and of being an isolationist, all notions that are, by the way, explicitly disproven by Trump's diplomatic efforts to engage the West in the project of mediating peace between Russia and Ukraine. And actually, it's not just Russia and Ukraine. Trump is working to achieve peace all over the globe, something that has attracted the notice of moderate liberal commentator Bill Maher. Let's watch.
It's funny, I see that today is the anniversary of Woodstock. This is 56 years ago. And the hippies, what did they hate more than anything else? War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. So if you're the kind of person who says, you can find some good in anybody, this would be the good in Donald Trump. He really does not like war. Thailand and Cambodia were firing at each other. Rwanda and the Congo. Most people don't even know about these. India and Pakistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan. He got involved in all of them.
All we are saying is give peace a chance. That's what I believe in. It's what Donald Trump seems to believe in, and it's what America First really means. And that's key. War should be a last resort. Diplomacy can accomplish more than sanctions or airstrikes or, God forbid, boots on the ground. Letting countries trade with each other and benefit from each other's resources is a surer way to get our allies and our enemies to serve our interests than twisting their arms with brute force. We don't need to ask the American people to send their hard-earned tax dollars overseas in some naive hope that it will make foreign peoples friendlier to us, nor should we bomb them into somehow loving America. Neither of those strategies, liberal interventionism on one hand, neoconservatism on the other, has worked for us. What does work for us is libertarianism, or you can call it military non-interventionism, or foreign policy populism, or just call it America First, whatever you want. It's what the people believe is good. It's what they're currently getting. And even Hillary Clinton has to admit it's sort of working. Even Hillary.
When I read this headline, I was like, wait, excuse me? Let me comb through this and watch this full interview. So, look, she did say that if he accomplishes it in a way that she thinks is appropriate, and I think the world and Zelensky in Europe thinks is appropriate, meaning not giving over any stolen land that was not won in the Cold War, like not doing any of that stuff, which she explained. And Trump doesn't seem like he has any intention on actually making a deal that is, to the benefit of our European allies or Ukraine. It seems like he's like, Russia's in a position of power, and so we're going to make it happen on Russia's terms. Kind of like what you said. They're the aggressor. They have the power. Unfortunately, like it or not, here's where we are. That doesn't technically make, to me, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. That just creates somebody who said, stop the fighting, give Russia what they want. Let's call it an end of the day. And, there's a lot of conversation about how serious this is to our European allies. Like, okay, Russia's not going to continue to invade other locations, but there's an actual concern from other leaders. Some of them are more defiant and speak up more, like Macron in France. Some of them are quieter, but a lot of them share the sentiments elsewhere within their own congregation that they feel that Russia can easily continue to, infiltrate and try to move forward and go back to the idea of being a stronger superpower and more like the Soviet Union, which is obviously the ultimate goal based on several things that Vladimir Putin has said over the last few decades. It's an intention not to stop. And so if you think he's just going to stop at Ukraine and we're going to say, oh, handshake deal, I don't know that that's going to work. And especially if you saw overnight that he's still bombing Ukraine, which is why a ceasefire was supposed to be imminent and would have been the first part of why I might have said, yes, President Trump maybe he should get a Nobel Peace Prize if he can get at least a ceasefire. We didn't get that. And so people are still being killed in Ukraine. Bombings just happened overnight. And I don't know that this is the peace route that anybody wanted aside from Putin.
So there's a couple things you said there.
Okay, let's start from the top.
I don't think, well, it's not about giving Putin Ukraine or conquered territories. Putin has taken those territories. So they're not ours to give. They belong to Ukraine. They don't belong to the U.S. or the rest of Europe. They were taken from Ukraine, and Putin has them now. So it's not about letting him have them. He has them. It's can we do anything to get them back? And the answer to that is no. No one has proposed a plan. Even the most hawkish pro-Ukrainian voices have no plan to recover the stolen territories. So there's no actual argument here. No one is proposing get back the stolen territories because there's no way to do that. Short of invading Russia with a full army.
Is off the table.
If it's off the table, Europe, up until now, their behavior does not suggest to me a fear that Russia is going to start invading the rest of Europe because they were letting us pay for half of this whole Ukraine. Like, they could spend more money. They could send troops. They're not doing any of that, which suggests to me they're not actually worried that a new Soviet Union is going to start. And actually, the Soviet Union.
I think that's a little unfair. I don't think that Europe. Anyone in Europe wants to get into a war with Russia either the same way that Russia doesn't want to get into a war with the U.S., the same way that the U.S. does not want to get into a war with Russia.
A bunch of people not want to get into war, and that's why we're all sitting down trying to quit.
Right, but that's why things like even the idea proposed about economic sanctions that had the hard deadline of August 8th is still a legitimate way to say, Putin, if you're serious about peace, you have to accept some of our terms. Even the lowest term would just be a ceasefire. Just pause bombing Ukraine. Like, try the night before we meet in Alaska. Trump could have said that. He bombed them that night. He's bombing them last night. He's been bombarding Ukraine nonstop, even though he just came off the conversation.
Thou art sanctioned.
No, it's not. It's not some proposal. It will ultimately cause grief to people that don't want, the world is experiencing inflation. The world is experiencing, lower incomes. The world is experiencing, hard times. It's not just the U.S. And so Russia and the people of Russia are put in predicaments that affect their wallet and their pocketbook. What's the first way to get people to react? Take away some of their money or cause any type of stress to them. I don't think that Putin wants that for everybody there. I don't think that Russian people want that. And I think that's a start to get him to react, because right now he's not doing anything we want him to do. A ceasefire was the smallest thing and imminent to all those European leaders. And so that...
Give peace a chance. All we're saying, give peace a chance. Trump is channeling those 60s hippies and just loves peace, man.
I'm not buying it.
Oh, hello there. Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for joining us on this special news show of ours. Nice to see you, Lindsay.
You didn't speak in Spanish today. What happened? You left me hanging. I thought I was going to hear a little bit more.
Time is just compressing, and I was like, did I do that yesterday? Did I do that weeks ago? I don't know. Where am I? What's going on?
I think because it's so dreary, which we've been telling people about in D.C. Yeah. I don't know how it is in the rest of the country who's watching, but it's very rainy and overcast, probably because the bad weather near North Carolina. Yeah. We need that sunshine so we can bring,
I think I said.
Oh, look, that's a live look at the Outer Banks, so you guys can see.
That looks dreary.
Yeah.
Actually, it looks kind of
peaceful,
haunting and romantic. I'd like to be on that.
Maybe you can have your wedding there.
Boardwalk.
Well, coming up on Rising, I'll be discussing how Steve Bannon is giving Gavin Newsom props for his Trump-style trolling.
Plus, a new reporting indicates that Elon Musk might not follow through on a third party after all.
And President Trump's latest comments on the Smithsonian Museum has caused outrage among those on the left. But first, Robby, what is on your radar?
There are a few women, more important in the conservative media ecosystem than Megyn Kelly. The former Fox News host has her own podcast empire, and she's among the most influential pro-Trump voices in independent media. Though initially combative with Trump while previously serving as a host at Fox, Kelly's become an ideologically reliable enforcer and promoter of pro-Trump views, particularly on cultural issues. On foreign policy, well, she's an ardent defender of Israel and the U.S.'s special relationship with that country. So it really means something when even Megyn Kelly is sounding less than enthusiastic about what Israel is doing in Gaza, about the level of financial support the U.S. is supplying to Israel, and also the amount of influence the Israel lobby exerts on the U.S. government. Now, on her show this week, she invited Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene to discuss AIPAC, the pro-Israel group, and the sway it holds over other members of Congress. Like Kelly, MTG's MAGA credentials are unimpeachable. She's one of Trump's most reliable backers, and she believes in America first. But MTG questions whether reflexively supporting everything the Israeli government does is actually in America's best interest. She also resents the level of influence that AIPAC seems to exercise over her colleagues. Here's MTG explaining it to Kelly.
Israel is the only country I know of that has some sort of incredible influence and control over nearly every single one of my colleagues. And it is, I don't know how to explain it.
I mean, I believe it just given the amount of reach out I've had in this position. And I don't vote on anything, you know,
Yeah.
And if I had taken money, I could see them really thinking that they had a right to control my speech or, you know, my positions. Right. Which is why I never have, of course.
Elsewhere in the interview, Kelly does plenty of throat clearing. She says she's always supported Israel's right to defend itself, and she still does. She would never, ever side with a terrorist group. Of course not. Neither would I. She's unwavering in that regard. But she knows the ground is shifting.
There's a contingent of people who are worried that they're losing me. And I've said that you're not losing. I'm not on Hamas's side.
No, God, no. Nobody's on Hamas's side.
But it's been a while now that this has been going on.
Right.
And we're getting more involved with the Iranian bombing and so on.
Sure.
And my own feelings are, you know, I'm looking at Israel in a different way right now than I was on 10/8, that's for sure, of 23.
Right.
And I can feel the pressure being slightly ratcheted up, like you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. And I can see people like you, like Tucker, who I know Tucker. I've known him for years. And I've seen you in your early career. I know you have nothing against Israel.
Megyn Kelly is not alone. The fact is many, many people in the MAGA movement are becoming more suspicious of the Israeli government. That does not mean they are anti-Israel. It certainly doesn't mean they're anti-Semitic. If they are anti-Semitic, they have no business in the conservative movement. What it means is that Israel has a slow-rolling PR crisis on its hands. For decades, Israel has enjoyed unqualified support from Republicans and Democrats, and in exchange, the President of the United States was able to exercise some power over the Israeli government's actions in the Middle East. Presidents from Reagan to Bush to Clinton to Obama got to say, okay, enough's enough, we aren't getting dragged into World War III. But under the Biden administration, that changed, as President Biden basically let Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu do whatever he wanted in Gaza as a result of October 7th. Maybe Joe Biden didn't even know what was going on. Now, even as that ultimately meant the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent people and the utter destruction of Gaza and the starvation of women and children, Israel's backers are now forced to present deeply uncomfortable arguments out of, well, such and such child's not really starving, they were already very sick. Look, these are not winning arguments, I'm sorry, and MAGA is noticing. I've certainly noticed it, and I've been defending Israel's right to defeat the terrorist group Hamas for years, including on this program. I've been uncompromising on this. If you've been watching for years, you know. But like Megyn Kelly and like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I cannot defend an unending campaign that kills tens of thousands of children. I can't defend a foreign lobbying group sidestepping requirements that every other foreign government has to follow, i.e. sign up under FARA. And I've never defended, ever, the aid money we send to Israel. Israel's a rich country with lower debt-to-GDP ratio than the U.S. Let them buy our weapons with their own money. That's fine. Which brings me to my last point. There are certainly elements of MAGA that want to back aid and support to Israel no matter what. Fine. I retweeted the MTG Kelly interview on X, and Laura Loomer replied to me, MTG doesn't speak for MAGA. That's true, she doesn't speak for everyone, but young, online, right-leaning MAGA folks are resentful of how much money we send to Israel. It's just a fact. Israel wants to restore its good standing with the America First crowd, they don't necessarily have to compromise their policies, but they should at least consider ending their reliance on our aid. I'm now hearing this even from some very pro-Israel people, that they think the support that they're getting from the U.S. is damaging the country in the eyes of young conservatives who are not for foreign aid of any kind. Again, it's not specific to Israel.
Right.
It's not a special beef with Israel. I wanted to cancel most of what USAID was doing as well. So consistent with that, they can do what they want to do. They should take out a terrorist organization, but we don't need to be paying for it, is, I think, a very easy, solid compromise that would restore the Israeli government's credibility in the eyes of the America First movement, and that's what MTG and Megyn Kelly are talking about. I
actually like that you brought up Biden in this. I usually say don't bring up Biden, but I think in this instance, there's a conversation to be had about the 23 or almost 2 years of the war happening between Hamas and Israel, and knowing that the strategies for almost both presidents were largely the same and similar. And to a lot of people outside looking in who all agreed that Israel had the right to defend itself, that this is not a consistent strategy that should be Israel kind of do whatever it wants. And so when people are looking at foreign policy and trying to differentiate between two distinct administrations, they can't really tell the difference, because it seems like there has been an immediate damning of anyone that says anything in contradiction of Netanyahu, which has always been my stance, that is not anti-Semitic. He's a leader. He can be wrong. He can have overreach. He can overstep. And also it can be true that Hamas is a terrorist organization that uses civilians inappropriately and put their lives at risk. But I think when you have, 2.3 million people that are starving and aid that's been cut off consistently at different points for almost 2 years, you have to understand that there are humans there, and then there are war crimes, and we operate at an international level with the rest of the world where history's watching, and how we handle this is going to be automatically watching. And the U.S. has made mistakes. The argument has been, well, no one said anything when the U.S. was doing all this and that after decided to go into wars. We did a lot of egregious stuff. So I understand from the pedestal with which a lot of leaders are speaking, but I just think as a regular civilian and just seeing people, to be honest, we have protests happening right outside of our building about this very topic. And I think that
deeply misguided protests, because those protesters are like shaming the media for not covering this. How frequently I talk about this and actually criticize the Israeli government and say that what's happening in Gaza needs to end? So those protesters out there who bang on their ridiculous drums and disrupt the operations in this building should get a clue about what we're actually talking about. They have no idea what they're talking about, but that's typical of totally misguided hippie left protesters.
We'll talk about more of this. Robby went way left.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Friday. I'm filling in for Amber Duke for the second Friday in a row.
Two Fridays. I'm getting used to this.
Long weeks when you do 5 days in a row. I'm not sure how you do it, Lindsay.
You know what? It's just every working American at home pretty much does these 5-day weeks, and you can on with me, Robby. Look, I'm going to pull him into 5 days.
Now I'm a real working class, roll up my sleeve.
Yes, get your hands dirty.
Yeah, I see how it is.
So we have a lot to talk about on the show besides getting Robby here on Fridays. Coming up on Rising, the FBI has raided John Bolton's house. We're going to definitely discuss that.
Also, Cracker Barrel's new logo change has many people outraged.
And I'll be discussing President Trump's attack on Smithsonian museums. But first, we're going to start like we always do. Robby, what's on your radar?
Can't wait to get to some of these other subjects, but for right now, another day, another reality check for the Democratic Party. Their candidates have alienated Gen Z, particularly white young men, although young men of color aren't huge fans of Democrats either. The New York Times dug into some numbers this week and found the Democratic recruitment drive is failing all over the country. Voter registration used to be a key metric for Democrats, as more voters generally meant more votes for the Democratic candidate. But now mass turnout arguably favors the GOP and Trump. Indeed, the Times analysis found some of the worst news for Democrats revolved around the young male vote. Writes the Times, the party saw some of its steepest declines in registration among young men and younger voters. The Times analysis found 2 constituencies that swung sharply toward Mr. Trump. Polling from Decision Desk HQ bears this out. Data scientist Zachary Danini writes on X, at the heart of the Democratic collapse, young white men are registering as Republicans in unprecedented numbers. Gen Z is on track to be the most pro-GOP generation since the Great Depression. There's 100 years ago. Now, the question that remains is this: why? Why is Trump's GOP dominating the category? Well, one potential reason is that the Democratic brand just doesn't appeal to young guys anymore. It's too feminine, too hostile even to men. That's what my friend, the independent journalist Zed Jolani, thinks the problem is. He writes on X, Democrats need to explicitly oppose misandry and distance themselves from liberal influencers who demonize men. Misandry is hatred of men. He's hitting the nail on the head. For years, perhaps decades, Democratic messaging has emphasized how our legal system, our economic system, our cultural traditions have harmed people of color, women, gay people, trans people, illegal immigrants, Muslims, Native Americans, the disabled, the economically insecure, and so on and so on and so on. Progressive activists have worked tirelessly to invent new categories of oppression and marginalization because perceived victim status is a ticket to greater influence within the cultural upper echelons of the Democratic Party. And this story of oppression and victimization needs a villain. Ivy League progressives have cast men and white people as the primary antagonists. I think the reason this messaging is especially alienating to young men is that, well, they probably feel like victims themselves sometimes, but they lack the option to describe themselves as such and suddenly enjoy the pity of progressive elites. Yet young men are increasingly disadvantaged in terms of their economic opportunities, their educational outcomes for certain, their health outcomes, and so on. And since older Americans, including, to be clear, older white Americans, are hoarding significant generational wealth, the boomers, for instance, prefer policies that keep their home prices high, sky high, it's harder for young guys to serve as providers and breadwinners. I think it can be really, really hard for them to buy homes, which isn't, strictly speaking, a problem just for men, of course. But a lot of young guys still have a sense, perhaps old-fashioned, that they're the ones who are supposed to be providing these things for their wives and for their own kids, or kids that they would have if they could afford to do so. The Democratic Party seems indifferent to these problems, and its most prominent surrogates often seem like they hate the people suffering from them, by which I mean elite campus liberals, some members of progressive media, and also liberal Hollywood. Until liberals fix this branding problem, male Zoomers are going to be in the Trump camp. And we'll be talking about the Hollywood aspect of this a little later on, as Disney is trying to figure out how can we get this demographic to watch our movies again. And I'll have some ideas on that.
Well, look, numbers don't lie. So when I saw this, I had to comb through to make sure Robby wasn't putting some icing on that cake.
Oh,
but it was really
the spin zone.
Yeah, I was making sure it wasn't too overly flavorful with your perspective on it. But I was like, oh, wow, this is a problem. Yeah. And I think that there are some solutions. Like, first, you have to address the trust gap that happened with President Biden and going into Kamala and the election results. I don't think that ever was addressed head on. I know that you more want to comb through Biden's cognitive decline, but also I think they should talk about the way forward. And when they start talking about that, address that perhaps that was mishandled. That's fine to do, not harp on it. I also think that they need to get back into the community and have conversations with people like Democrats, unlike Republicans, have been doing all summer recess with their free time home from Congress, because they're ready to face the people and talk about how...
I mean, the town halls.
Yeah.
Yeah, young guys are not going to those things.
Yeah.
Those are for old
Fine.
people.
But
They're for old women. They're not... They're for retirees
people are
who have
civically
time
engaged
to go to the town. No.
But third, they should play offense, not defense. So if you see what Governor Gavin Newsom is doing, which I have been tickled by and praising all week, it's the fact that you are getting ahead of it with messaging, with gaining attention, using social media, doing podcasts. These are all effective tools.
Yeah, those things are more.
Yeah, now we want to talk about the policy. So there should be not one accord, because Republicans are not on one accord. So there shouldn't just be one main message, but there should be goals that we're striving to and a few ways to get there that are clearly laid out. Like, the game plan is laid out. Like we always talk about, like with the Republicans, I call Project 2025 the boogeyman that is a, deterrence to what we actually should be accomplishing, in my opinion, for the nation. But you say it was just a laid out plan, right? So there was one that Trump was not acknowledging that he followed, but there was a plan that he is following. Mm-hmm. And so I think the same thing with Democrats. They started this idea. We've interviewed people about creating their own Project 2029. So we'll see if they do. I don't know if they should go with that name, but there should be a laid out guideline on what the exact plans for the party are as a whole, as opposed to, like you did, they overcorrected sometimes, trying to figure out how to be in the forefront of every single social issue. Maybe there are some economic issues that are more pressing that they need to go figure out with local young people. Because like you said, there's a lot of people who are graduating now, can't afford houses, can't even think about having a kid. These are all on young people's minds, and I think they feel overlooked a lot by the conversation that's kind of like way up here with, people things that people have the luxury to think about rather than the things right in front of their face.
Yeah. And I don't think you can underrate the effect that the demonization from, not really from the Democratic Party itself or its candidates, but from the people who are stand-ins for the Democratic Party, progressive commentators, campus radicals, for which, you know, the white men are like the greatest boogeyman that has ever lived. That's had an effect over time, I think.
Well, I think that there is always a need for things like feminism, empowerment, elevating people of color, right, because of systemic issues in our society that have paid women less, put women in positions where they weren't, you know, earning the same thing, or heads of households, denied loans to people of color, things like that that have happened systemically built in based on racist systems that we have in place. Or sexist, many things, right? There's still a wage gap between men and women. But I do think that there are ways that you could swing the pendulum way too far and talk about it to a point where even the people who are trying to help or doing something feel isolated by the conversation. And I think I always appreciate we talk about having more conversation with the people that you want to solve things with, as opposed to trying to ostracize and say, we've got this, you're the boogeyman, you're terrible. And so I do think that the pendulum swung a little bit too far, but there always is room for improvement, as I know you can agree when people have these conversations about different communities that feel like they're not, or not even feel, that factually are not on the same playing field.
I just saw this. I didn't put it in my radar because I saw it literally seconds before we were about to go.
Okay.
But apparently there's a new memo. This is in Politico from Democrats. It's a memo, internal memo for 45 words and phrases Democrats are to avoid using that have put a wall between us and everyday people of all races, religions,
Who
and
put this
ethnicities.
memo out?
This is from Third Way.
Okay.
It's within the Democratic. No more therapy speak. No more explaining away crime. No more things that violence as in environmental violence. No more dialoguing. No more triggering. No more othering. No more microaggressions. Holding space. Body shaming. Subverting norms. All of these are words they should stop using.
Holding space and therapy? It's not. I don't agree with that.
Therapy speak is harmful. I'm not supposed to say harmful, but
okay.
Therapy speak is very bad.